Okay, in this presentation, we're going to look at some of the monumental achievements of the ancient Near East, Mesopotamia. I tend to set everything in the setting of the era of King Hammurabi of Babylon around 1750, 1700 BC. Here's a map showing some of the major cities. Most of these are earlier Mesopotamian cities, but again, this was the big urban region of Mesopotamia. You can see how the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were relatively close at this point, and aerial photography shows these irrigation ditches that extended between the rivers, creating a lush green belt so that this place was a surplus producing region for grain production. So that's what enabled it to have large populations. It's just rich alluvial soil. The mountains are to the north, to the east, and to the west, and desert. But for the most part, this is just a rich desert plain that could produce all kinds of foodstuffs. Here's just a view, old photograph. I've never been to Iraq, so here's a view of the Tigris River and some of the reed huts along the side. Reeds are one of the common building elements of this region. And the text mentions the Sumerian ration bowl, so I wanted to present one of these. Again, these are found in any of the early Bronze Age cultures in Mesopotamia all the way to Iran. And it's believed that these were a component of the aspect of household economy, of how corporate life in Mesopotamia emerged from these extended households in which everybody would have some role in the household and derive from the benefits of the household, but have to seek employment outside as well. So when we see these, we're looking at maybe the earliest vestiges of development of state. Now, as we said, cuneiform was the main writing technology. It there were many competing versions. Ultimately, Akkadian, which was cuneiform, Sumerian cuneiform adapted to Semitic Akkadian, became the standard international lingua franca of Mesopotamia right through to the end of the Persian Empire, in fact, one of the main languages. And here we see these tablets are actually quite small. They were temporary. They were not meant to become permanent. When they did survive, it's usually because they were fire hardened during the destruction of the archive where they were kept. And this is some sort of a ration list, in fact, just kind of a list of workers and when they were paid. This is a seal stone, so you have a little a stone ring there, usually with a hole through it that they could wear on a leather necklace, and then you would press it against the dried mud, and it would reveal your crest, your heraldic insignia, so that usually these tablets would be sheathed in a envelope of clay, and then they would rub this across that to indicate who the sender was. And as long as the envelope had not been broken, you could be fairly certain that the message inside remained undisclosed. Another fascinating example of cuneiform. This is the shape. This is a priestly artifact. This is the shape of a liver. And what it's doing, it's giving you an outline for purposes of analysis, for divination, of the various areas of the liver and what was positive and what was negative. So it's sort of like you could study this and look at a liver and be able to prognosticate the future. And here is the famous stearite obelisk tablet stone of Hammurabi's law code. And we see Hammurabi receiving the law code from Marduk. Here is a mound. So one of the things I can't show you very well are these tells or mounds, these built up urban settlements that represent hundreds of years of accumulated layering of buildings over time that had to be knocked down, packed down, and then rebuilt on top of it. So layering, this is a real component. And this is the great site of Susa, originally one of the three principal Elamite capitals, always a rival to Mesopotamia, controlled for the most part by Babylonia and Assyria, and ultimately became one of the three principal palace complexes of the Persian emperor as well. And down below we see two views. We're going to look at ziggurats. So the main monumental achievement of Mesopotamia are these mud brick, large terrace-like temple complexes. known as a ziggurat. And then to the right, we have a view, an artist's view of Babylon. So here is the ziggurat. There you can actually see the ziggurat of Babylon, um, ziggurat of Marduk at Babylon, upper right, lower left, and you can see a reconstruction of it. So these structures, about 300 feet on the side, probably about 300 feet tall. It's got sort of 8 terraces that went up with the temple at the top. More views of this. And the excavations of Babylon itself, it was originally excavated by a German expedition, 1899 to 1917, by Robert Caldwell, and has since 1958 has been the excavation of the General Directorate of Antiquities of Iraq. Let's go ahead and see more. Some reconstructions of the city. I can read a little bit about it. The city represented a vast square straddling the Euphrates River, surrounded by a broad, deep moat of water, kept permanent with brick revetment on each bank. There were some 100 brazen gates, that is constructed with bronze doorposts and lintels, 25 on each side, and numerous right-angled street intersections. The city was divided by the Euphrates River. The riverbanks came right through the middle of the river. Riverbanks were supported by brick walls and equipped with quays. There was one major bridge. Herodotus describes the circuit wall at 400 stadia, or 56 miles in circumference. The outer wall was some 150 feet thick and 200 feet tall, and all constructed of fired brick and sealed with hot bitumen. So bitumen is an unprocessed form of petroleum. It's not clear to what degree they knew how to use it. They knew how to burn it. They used it in cement to seal walls as well. It is kind of noxious, so you have to be careful with it, but they may have used it together with animal dung as a form of fuel, since wood was so scarce in this region. The total area of the city represented some 500 acres, surrounded by double walls of burned brick so thick that chariots could pass along its top. Let's go ahead and see some more views of Babylon. One thing I like to point out, so we'll get to this, is how the fortified precincts were not only along the perimeter, but also in the interior. The Temple of Marduk was separated from the city by a fortification system, as were the various palace complexes. So one of the kind of key signatures of cities in the ancient Near East, Mesopotamia, is this interior fortification system. And many of these capital cities were actually constructed by Babylonian or Assyrian kings with captive peoples that they enslaved, having defeated enemies. And so there seems to have been a need to protect the elite from their own populations as well. So kind of bear that in mind when we think about collapse of the Bronze Age in particular. Here is the Ishtar Gate, one of the 200 gates that we mentioned. This has been restored and moved to the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. Here's some other views of this. So this is fired brick, and it was glazed with this kind of blue turquoise color, and animal reliefs on it as well. Here it was during the excavation. And here's just with humans to get a sense of the scale. And a view of this relief that would have been made out of multiple bricks and had to be kind of made separately, but like a puzzle, so that they could be put together to form this griffin. The royal procession way was some 63 feet wide, paved in red and white stone. Both the palace and the temple complex were protected by interior defenses. As we said, the ziggurat was about 7 stories tall. The palace contained 5 courtyards with offices and a reception room, and the river facade was terraced. By means of subterranean waterworks, a vast park was created on the rooftops overlooking the Euphrates, which is where we get the connotation of the hanging gardens. And the estimated population stood in excess of 100,000 people. Really one of the few cities of that size in the ancient world. And with that, I leave you at the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.